And now here's part 2 of our episode.
They do love a good long instrumental intro on this album, don't they?
Oh boy. Well, I'm such a nerd that I marked down when the vocals came in on every single track on this album.
Sick. What did you find? What was your conclusion that you pulled from that?
So starting with Fascination Street, which we just heard, that is a 5-minute, 16-second song. The vocals come in at 2:22. And they also drop out for a full minute later in the song, which is just incredibly gutsy. I can't even comprehend it, especially in 1989. But yeah, 12 tracks on this album. And I believe 10 out of 12, the vocals come in after the 1-minute mark. And then many of those are after the 2-minute mark, and one is after the 3-minute mark. So they are pandering to no one.
Yeah. Such a specific, it's a specific way of not pandering.
It is. And I love that. There's so much art, movies, music that I love when people challenge you to pay attention. And I think this is a way of doing it. I also think that he views vocals as one of the instruments. And this is like this tapestry of instruments that are fading in and out, that are building in, creating these compositions. So it's a really, not what a lot of front men in the 80s were doing, for sure. It was, a lot of showboating and, wheedly-deeing on guitars. And this is really like, hey, we have all of these amazing songwriters. Even if Robert Smith wrote all the music, it feels like, at least, that everybody has a point of view and has their instrument showcased in pretty much equal measures, which I think is amazing and pretty rare.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, every song on this, I think like the shortest song on this album, like there might be one song that's like 3 minutes something, but most of them are pretty long on this album.
Yeah, yep. Love Song and Lullaby. Love Song is 3:29 and Lullaby is 4:08, and most of them are much, much longer than that.
And so if I'm understanding the trajectory correctly, and this would be a bit after they sort of went more pop, right? Like a few of the albums before this had a little bit more of a pop sensibility, and then this, as it kind of represented a return to form a little bit in terms of that less structured, less pop structured formation.
Yeah, I would say like their first few albums had that kind of post-punk, a little bit stripped down and leaning into the more synthetic sounds of the early 80s. And this feels like that with a budget and with like an orchestral sensibility, So Head on the Door and Kiss Me, Kiss Me, Kiss Me are like super poppy, dancey albums. They still didn't really cross over in the US. So this sold more than both of those albums. But I feel like Lullaby and Love Song, the shorter songs that are the only quote unquote pop songs on this record, to me feel like they perhaps were written during Kiss Me, Kiss Me, Kiss Me, or they kind of are the bridge between the songs on that album and the songs on this album, in that they're a little bit silly, they're more contained, they have a verse chorus structure, and then they still fit in within this album, but the other albums are very much a departure from that.
20,000 points for Wheedly D's of the other things that were happening in rock music at the time, because I've never heard that before, but I'm keeping that one.
I feel like it was like an early 2000s like Jack Black-ism that I just like tucked away, perhaps. Yeah. But yeah, Wheedly D's.
What's crazy to me is that Friday I'm in Love is going to come after this album.
Yes, and lots of other poppy stuff on Wish, but also stuff that sounds like this too. But it feels like this is very much like an inflection point, or just a moment where they put these specific design constraints on. Again, I wasn't in the studio. I don't know what they actually set out to do, but it feels like I love a design exercise, and I love being like, okay, what if we don't start the vocals until this far into the song? What if the album was an hour and 12 minutes? What if, everybody contributed equally? It just really feels like this artistic exercise in a way that more so than other albums of theirs, which I think is so cool. It feels like uncompromising.
Not to get too theater nerdy about it, but that always makes it talking about setting yourself a structure in the collaborative process always makes me think about that Anne Bogart thing, right? Where she says, like, you need something to push up against. That's where the art happens. Like, you need some kind of limit that you are struggling against in the artistic process.
Yeah. And then that's specifically how my brain works. And, I was not diagnosed with ADHD until my late 30s, but it for me makes a lot of sense. Like, I'm terrified of a blank canvas, but if you say, hey, do something that accomplishes this and this, or use this but don't use this, and I'm like, okay, I have 100 ideas.
Right. Here's an assumption. Here's a hat. Wear this hat and see what the hat does to you.
Exactly. Yeah.
I think when I listen to this album as a whole, it sounds like everything is at approximately the same tempo or thereabouts. Like, there is sort of a uniformity to this album overall, and I was trying to come up with a way of describing the overall tone. And to me, for the most part, with a few exceptions, this album feels like major key melancholy to me. Would you agree with that, or would you define the album differently?
I like that. I think that I wrote down in my notes if the Cure had a subgenre, it would be dancing at a funeral. And I think, and that could be a slow dance or it could be a fast dance, but I hear what you're saying about the tempo, and yeah, there's some ominous, like, minor key stuff in here, but yeah, it does have a very cohesive feel. But again, I'm a nerd, so I was like, I'm going to classify these tracks into 5 different vibes.
Ooh, go for it.
Would you like to hear them?
Oh, yes, we would. Yes, we would.
And just so you know, I gave you 333,000 points for subgenre dancing at a funeral.
Yay. Awesome. So, like I said, 12 tracks, and it doesn't divide perfectly evenly, but I have, and the cool, one of my criteria for what makes a great album is like the sequencing, right? It's like sets a mood and it tells a story. And even if there's like a similar tempo or similar, structure, it still has peaks and valleys. So I have, here are my 5 types of songs on this album. Yeah. I mentioned pop already. So I'll put Love Song and Lullaby in that category. They're contained, they're short, the vocals start at an expected time, they have verses and choruses, and they're very tidy, and I feel like those could be dropped into, I could put that on a mix for my parents, or I could put it on, either a best of the Cure or just like best of the late 80s, and it would still be like, oh, okay, like normies could still enjoy this without doing a deep dive into the Cure, right? So those are the pop songs. What I've called the presentational tracks are the kind of, here we are making a statement, is Plain Song and Close Down.
Okay.
I've called the next group Wistful tracks, which is Pictures of You, The Same Deep Water as You, and Untitled, which is the closing track. The 4th type is Regretful, which I categorized Last Dance, Prayers for Rain, and Homesick. And then the last group is the ominous tracks, and those are just 2. One is Fascination Street and the other is Disintegration. And that was hard. I almost chose Disintegration when I was thinking about it, because those are such similar vibes to me. They're completely different songs, but they evoke, a kind of like feeling of dread, but also they have groove, which is just such an interesting combo.
Yeah.
But yeah, and that's why this is the perfect album to me, because it is like each track on its own is amazing, but it's better as a, at the way that it's assembled and its composition.
Before we go any further, I would like to officially induct you into the Achenbach Club in our podcast, because
what's that?
So in a previous season, Michael Achenbach came on to talk about Lizzo's album and used this very sort of similar categorization method that we decided we would refer to as the Achenbach method. And so now you are now the second member of that club. So
the Achenbach
excellent.
Club. Yeah, it's an auspicious club.
Shout out to Michael Achenbach too. And
awesome.
Hi, Michael.
Yay. Oh, well, anything associated with Lizzo is A-okay.
Oh, God, love her. Yeah. I really like this breakdown. This makes these terms make a lot of sense. And I also think like wistful, presentational, regretful, and ominous are categories, and then I'll obviously pop too, but I feel like that's sort of the outlier there. If you think of their contemporaries too, you see those sort of ideas running through their contemporaries as well. And when your description of ominous also made me think of Depeche Mode a little bit too.
Oh yes, very much so.
Mm-hmm.
There's a Venn diagram overlap there. And then I mentioned the Smiths earlier too, which here's my little sidebar to that. Do you think that this album is for a rainy day or a sunny day?
This one is for a rainy day.
Mm.
But I think, the whole dancing at a funeral thing,
Yeah.
It could be like a sunny day with a unexpected rain shower, or, I was listening to it in the car the other day, driving, through this beautiful landscape in Western Mass. And it was one of those cloudy, rainy days that had like random patches of sun that shone through. And so I was like, wow.
Yeah. I love that.
The music gods know what I'm listening to. Yeah. So it is like, because there is a lot of their catalog that feels almost manic in a sense of like, oh my gosh, I want to like, I don't know, like I want to like destroy something, but like in a really fun way, and then sort of and I never watched a lot of music videos growing up because we didn't have cable, but certainly the Friday I'm in Love video feels that way to me, where it's just playing around with like makeup and clothes, but you're also just like, being crazy in an abandoned house or whatever.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of duality going on in this era and in this band and in this album.
I like that. The sunlight coming through, breaking through seems to be, that's an image that really makes a lot of sense to me. There's also a bit of, in Robert Smith, that artistic archetype of there's so much within him that he can't, I get the sense is, studying him and listening to how he's progressed and how he's described his work over the years, feels like he's constantly trying to reinvent himself and constantly trying to say like, oh, there's still more inside me. I still have more to say. And I'm not sure, I'm scared that I'll never have a chance to say it all, which I think is an artistic impulse that I really commiserate with, I guess.
Definitely. And it's so resonant for, now that we've reached middle age and feeling like, oh, wow, I only started, thinking about myself as a musician in the last 10 years and just, I don't know, upending that idea that we had when we were young, that like everybody makes it at 25 and then they just keep doing the same thing forever. That actually sounds like hell to me, like what, like, I mean, my brain was not at its best when I was 25. And if that was when my artistic exploration stopped, it would be very boring. So I love when artists can age into different eras, like in the public eye and in their own, their own evolution.
Real quick, I just rest in peace to Gordon Lightfoot, who died this past week. But I saw a great little video of him talking about how much he loved Drake, and I was like, this is so surprising, right? We have these little, you think,
and wonderful.
Really, I know, isn't it? It's like, and you really see in he's so effusive about how professionally done he felt like Drake's album was, how all the songwriting was really well done. And you're like, man, you really have to shed all of your preconceived notions that this old folkhead probably wouldn't dig Drake's music, but they're countrymen, they're Canadians, proud Canadians, and being able to reshape your mind over time has to be like an essential ingredient of maintaining the kind of creativity that Robert Smith has over the years too.
Totally. And even though I'm not super well versed in music from the last 15 years, I don't reject it. I've never, if I feel myself thinking like nobody does good blank anymore, I'm like, whoa. That's what the old people have always said. Yeah. And don't be that person, because, you see people like Sonic Youth and Talking Heads, David Byrne, Bowie before he passed away. Conan O'Brien talks about this a lot. Just these people that I think of as, capital A artists who are always platforming younger and smaller acts and talking them up and being like, yes, this, like, I am inspired by this younger person in this different genre. And I don't know, I never want that to go away, because that is like the death of, evolution.
It is. Yeah.
The only thing I get old man about is that I wish that that younger generations had the same appreciation for albums that I think we did, largely due to the fact that, things there, we can shuffle through songs nowadays, but I mean,
right. So it's not their fault, right?
Right,
Like that's
yeah.
how music is served to
It's
them, is
technology,
just
exactly.
these little bites. So, but I totally like the whole, having to like listen through and like flip the tape or flip the record and, not just like skipping around tracks. I definitely feel like, oh, we should somehow force people to have this experience, because it's not easy for them to do it now.
Yeah.
Like if I was coming of age now, I probably wouldn't appreciate albums either.
Let's talk about what makes this album perfect for you.
Yes.
What are your standards? Because we did not define the word for you, so it's up to you to determine how did you arrive at this album, as well as I guess the other 3 albums that you chose. We want to talk about that, or you can just talk about this album.
So I mentioned I love a design constraint, and so I was like, okay, what's my criteria? What does perfection mean? And trying to apply that across the albums that I sent to you and just the albums that have remained timeless to me was, so 4 things. The first being it evokes a certain time and also remains timeless. I talked about that a little bit already. The second, the creative freedom and the collaboration are palpable in the album in many different ways, which I can get into. The third being every song is good individually, but they're even better all together. There's no, filler tracks or tracks that you would want to skip over. Mm-hmm. And then I also already mentioned the fourth one, which is the sequencing. It really like sets a mood, tells a story. Every track has been like painstakingly selected in the order that it's in. And it feels like you're going on a journey. Mm-hmm. So those are my 4 criteria, and this album hits it.
Talk more about that creative freedom and collaboration one. You said you had more things you could say about that.
Yeah. So I mentioned the term composition. Mm-hmm. This feels like a composition. It could be like a score to a movie. It could be, it could have no vocals. It would still be like an amazing piece of music. It could be transposed back to like the 1700s and be played like with an orchestra, and it would still be amazing. Yeah, I don't know what I think it was Elektra that they were on. I don't know what the label told them, or what gave them the full creative freedom to just be like, yeah, we're gonna follow up a couple of poppy albums with an hour and 12-minute album with like 8-minute songs plus, and vocals not coming in until halfway through the songs. But I appreciate it because I think it really added to like the overall vibe of the record, and it really makes it stand apart from the other stuff. I was thinking about, the pop tracks that I mentioned, Love Song and Lullaby. I wonder if, because Lullaby did pretty well on the US charts as a single. Mm-hmm. And I wonder if a bunch of people who bought this thinking that the rest of the album was going to sound like that were pissed. Because, they're like, oh, I'm in like an experience. And I just wanted to like hear a bunch of other like 3 and 4 minute, boppy, gothy pop songs. Right. Mm-hmm. So I think about that a lot, that they could have gone in that direction. They probably have 100 songs that they just didn't record, but they were like, nope, this is what we want to do. I talked about this a little bit already, but every instrument and every member of the band feels like they're equally showcased. And they're, whether it's like over the course of the song, like iterating on the same chords in different ways, or they cut out and come back in at different times. But it really, I don't know. We're somebody that really dislikes jam bands. I feel like, wow, is this a jam band album? I don't know. The Cure and Sonic Youth, I feel like they get a pass, and perhaps Radiohead as well. I'm throwing you a bone there, Mike. But like, yeah, I really like those are bands that I feel like they can have 10-minute songs, and they can loop and iterate and have the same tenets as like a jam band, but it doesn't provoke anger in me. So,
but don't you think that, I feel like this to me feels closer to Philip Glass than jam band, because there's sort of like it's a different sort of meditative effect than like, yes, there's also something meditative about jam bands, but I feel like if there's a spectrum with Fish on one end and Philip Glass on the other, I feel like the Cure is more towards the Philip Glass side.
I love that you said that, because it's like a soundscape in some ways, right? Like there's a few and again, I'm like just starting to like get into like music making as a person. So I was like asking Ryan, like, what did they do to achieve this effect? And he's like, I actually don't know. Like, and he's like a gearhead, right? So like I'm thinking of that, like the broken glass sound on the beginning of Disintegration. I'm like, that sounds like organic breaking glass, but did they record it and then sample it? Is it some weird like synth setting? I don't know. And there's like quite a few sounds on this that sort of blur those lines between organic and synthetic that I just think is really cool, because a lot of the late 80s, especially mainstream sound, was like, this is a synthetic, very like compressed sounding drum machine, Paula Abdul, that type of thing, where like this is like this expansive universe, but they're still using a lot of synthetic effects. So it just feels like they just had, the sky was the limit in terms of what they could do. And I'm so impressed by that on like a pretty major label.
Oh yeah. And like jam bands like Fisher, even freaking Dave Matthews Band, like those songs meander. There's nothing meandering about this. That's
album, true. Yeah, I think I used the word looping, and I do like, you hear like a looping, but it's like an iteration more than it's like a building on itself more than a meandering. Like, let's just see what happens, man.
Totally. There's also it has the same level of intentionality, I think, of an album within the last 15 years. But one of our favorites that we've talked about on this podcast is "Blonde" by Frank Ocean. Like, there's a similar level.
I do know that one, and I love it. Yes, that's such a great parallel. Yep.
Without being reductive, right? We talk about genre, and we talk about the degree to which genre is helpful or not. We've talked about them as a goth band as well. There's something about the 80s, and I think particularly Smith's voice, that to me evokes that decade. And I think because of when you look at the timeline and you see where the influence might have been happening, it feels like his vocal quality really influenced a lot of the singing in 80s rock music, in my opinion. I think I can see
Can you give some examples?
I mean, it's just a lot of that, like even the more popular stuff, like the Duran Duran and the those other like very poppy 80s bands, like even I'm not sure, they're probably more like contemporaries. I don't have my timeline all right, but like Aha, like that kind of singing.
And it's funny because a lot of them had hits in like the early mid 80s when of course The Cure had already had several albums, but they didn't cross through mainstream as much as those other bands you mentioned on that timeline. So it's almost like those bands were influenced by The Cure, vocally and otherwise, and then they got more successful. It's kind of like when Kurt Cobain would always talk about the Pixies, and the UK had already discovered them, and we were just kind of like, huh? So it does feel like that they were one of those like tastemaker bands where like their ripple effect and their influence went out, and some of those bands had more commercial success than they ever had.
Yeah.
I would say in some ways that even The Cure would be an influence on one of my favorites, and I think on Nine Inch Nails a little bit too. I mean, I mean, Nine Inch Nails is taking it to a different extreme, but I think that you listen to Pretty Hate Machine, and Pretty Hate Machine sounds like if The Cure were angrier and had more like electronics.
Yes, yep, and I think that Trent Reznor is a little more. I see him as more of a solo artist that just happens to have people like go on tour with him. And even though The Cure has gone through different lineups, they're certainly like Simon Gallup on bass, and other members have like really contributed to their sound more so. But I hear what you're saying, Mike. I think like the whole like pop being dark and being angsty and being not uplifting in that way that a lot of 80s pop was, definitely like shares the DNA between stuff like Nine Inch Nails, and I think we talked about the Smiths earlier too, which were contemporaries too, but surely like influencing one another.
And I believe Trent inducted them into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, did he not?
Yes,
I think he was the one that gave the speech.
Yes, I actually didn't see that like live when it happened, but I went back and saw it. Yeah, it was super cool. I would like to go there. I've never been to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame.
Oh, Michael and I have been there together.
Oh,
it's worth it. It is
worth going to Ohio.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
it's definitely.
Please
I
don't
will
steal.
say it's. I mean, it's very unsurprisingly, it's very guy heavy.
Yeah.
I mean, the Hall of Fame itself is
Oh,
very guy
yes.
heavy right now. But I think I feel like they're trying to make some changes. But if you love the music, it's like Disney World for me when
So
I've
much
gone there.
memorabilia. It's really cool.
Yeah, I have a friend who went there recently and took her kids who are around the same age as my kids, and everybody had an amazing time. So yeah, I appreciate like when Nirvana was inducted and they had all the female fronted, covers of their songs as part of it. Like I do think it is changing for sure. Yeah.
Kristen, this has been wonderful, and was so, just on a personal level, this was a very good album for me this past week. So it's time is a flat circle, and
Yes.
and sometimes albums come to you when you need them, and this one did. I really loved it.
Oh, I'm so happy to hear that.
And the other thing you should know is that this is a competition, and that you have been competing to win thus far, and these points matter.
Wow. Okay. What do I win?
It's America.
Oh, you win bragging rights, and those bragging rights are very, very valuable.
Wow.
But you have a lot working in your favor, and so what we're going to do is we're going to go to the board, and we're going to see what points you got, and assess whether this album does in fact go to 11, whether it is a perfect album. I kept track of your criteria for perfection, which again is Achenbach tier in its thoroughness, and it's spot on. I think for this album, you did a great job on that.
Fantastic.
So I'm going to give you 1 million points for all the criteria that you gave for perfection. Before that, I gave you 333,000 points for the subgenre of the Cure being dancing at a funeral. Great subgenre.
Yeah.
200,000 points for Weedly D's in the late 80s. we credit Jack Black for that one, but it's perfect. 10,000 points for being situated in the Pioneer Valley hotbed of music in Western Mass. I need to get out there at some point and just tool around. That sounds like a good trip.
Yeah, it's great.
900 points for invoking Columbia House again. This is, I think, the second or third appearance of Columbia House.
Yeah, not surprised.
Yeah, needs to mention it. We were talking about 9 Inch Nails, so
excellent.
Yeah, we're of a generation.
It's perfect. It's perfect.
Right place, right time.
Transportative. 600 points for also playing handbells in joining Michael in that illustrious group. I think it just means that I need to learn how to play handbells. So
man.
Maybe I'll take that up.
It's very satisfying. Like the things you can get it to do, like really like shaking it or like pounding it on the table and making
and
sound.
the different dampening effects. It's pretty punk rock.
I give you 2,000 points for your initial assessment that The Cure is music to you. Strong way to start your argument. You gave me 4.5 crumpets out of 5 crumpets for my 60-second intro, which adds to your case. It was all in service of the case that you're making. So I think this board is looking pretty damn strong. And of course, we couldn't have possibly fit in just all the powerful music that The Cure has made over the years. They're one of the biggest bands in the world, and so we're glad to finally have them on the pod. Michael, though, I put it to you. You see the points on the board. You've heard Kristen's case. Tell me, does Disintegration by The Cure go to 11? Is it a perfect album?
I mean, I'm going to be biased because I love Kristen, but of course, yes, this goes to 11. Perfect album. Yes.
Oh, phew. Okay. Oh, yay.
The only thing I wish we could have talked about was, if we had gone with Patti Smith, like we could have talked about the show that we did together our senior year, Kristen, a play called Stupid Kids by John C. Russell.
With a very excellent soundtrack. Sound design.
It would have to be.
Yes. Yes, handpicked by Mike. But I was not like, I went into that as a, awareness of Patti Smith, but I definitely became a fan because of that production and because of that character and Mike. So thank you for that. Because I've gotten to see her perform and bought, her poetry books and she's a seminal figure. Yes.
Evergreen. She is. Yeah.
And thank you for bringing this album to us. Cause I've never been a Cure, big Cure fan. I've never been a Cure hater or anything like that, but I've never been able to like dive into a whole album of theirs this way. And it feels like this was the right one to to give a deep dive to, frankly.
Oh, perfect. I'm so psyched that you had that experience.
Oh yeah.
So we should share what our standout track is, Michael, don't you think?
I think so.
What did we go with?
Well, we decided not to go with one of the like pop hits or more recognizable songs. We decided to go with a song which on a purely selfish level was really like running through my brain the entire week, which is the closing track, Untitled.
Oh, love it.
I mean, I think it achieves that looping thing you're talking about earlier. Mm-hmm. Like, I mean, it feels it is on a loop, but there's something very, I don't know. I was looking up some things about the song, and I guess like Billboard wrote about the album and said the song was like so depressing that he couldn't even give a title to it, or something along those lines. Which I don't find the song. I mean, lyrically, yes, it's depressing, but I feel like something about the loop doesn't feel torturous to me.
Yeah, the previous song, Homesick, feels more like completely hopeless to me, musically. But I think that the lyrics for sure on this, and I love that kind of like, I'm sure it's on the keys, but whatever, like squeeze box or like accordion effect that they have to, and that's like the last thing that you hear, like opens and closes the song. And it feels like they composed it as a closing song. It really does, in the same way that Plain Song feels like an album opener. And so I don't know if they just did that in the arrangement after they did all the songs, or they actually wrote with that in mind, but it could go either way. But this really feels like a definitive closing track. So I'm so happy that that's what you picked.
This is a well sandwiched album. You're right. The opening track, I was also thinking the opening track too, but the striking. Last one.
Well, thank you so much, Kristen, for joining us. This has been a real treat, and we will see everybody next week. Here is Untitled by The Cure. Have a great week.
Thanks. Bye, everyone.
Bye.